Tak, dobrý den, já vás tady všechny vítám na Mezinárodním víkendu 2024 a dneska 22.12. zde máme přednášku od velmistra Tomáše Poláka, která bude poměrně aktuální, protože se bude se zabývat mistrovstvím světa 2024, které skončilo tady před 14 dněma zhruba, a přednáška bude v anglickém jazyce, takže já tady všechny vítám. Držím Tomášovi palce a užijme si to takhle. Hodně štěstí a díky moc za to, že Tomáš pro nás má další přednášku.
So hello and good evening. My name is Tomáš Polák and I will be your English guide of the World Chess Championship match, which was held in November and December this year. The match was consisting of 14 games, and I will have a short look at 7 games of the match. The match was played between the reigning world champion Ding Liren from China and the challenger Gukesh Dommaraju. The match was won by Gukesh after all 7.5 to 6.5. As you know, and Gukesh, is the rising star from India. He's just 18 years old, so he became the youngest world champion ever. Just a few words about the defending champion Ding Liren from China. He became the champion in 2023. After defeating Jan Nepomniachtchi in the championship match. But after this, he had a very bad period, and he didn't play in many tournaments, and he started, so he made some few months break from chess. He had some mental difficulties, and he started to play in January 24 in Tata Steel Masters, then in Norway Chess and Grenke Chess Classics, but he didn't win any single game in classical chess. Afterwards, he participated with the Chinese team at the Chess Olympiad. But his performance was rather poor. He made I think 3.5 out of 8, and didn't win any single game. So before the match, Gukesh was a clear favorite. The journey of Gukesh to this match, he qualified to the candidates tournament, which was held in Toronto. In March, I think, this year. This is the table of candidates tournament. So Gukesh won with 9 out of 14, 8.5 Nakamura, Nepomniachtchi, and Caruana, and so on. And Gukesh played very well before the match. For instance, he made an incredible result at the Chess Olympiad in September. He played on the first board and made, if I remember well, 9 out of 10 games, and he won this first board. It was held in Singapore, as I said. And just few words. Time control. It is important, as we will see. So classically 120 minutes for 40 moves, but without any increment. And increment started just after move 40. Yeah, they met, of course, in the previous times, and Ding was was favorite in classical games, because in classic chess, Dink had the result against Gukesh 2.5 to 2.5 only. So Dink didn't lose any game to Gukesh in classic chess before this match, and Gukesh won just one game in Blitz or Rapid. Concerning the teams of both players, about the Chinese team, so the team of Dink Liren, I know just that his main second was Richard Rapport from Hungary, and of course there were some Chinese players. Here is written Nihua, but maybe some other. And the team of Gukesh, his main coach is Grzegorz Gajewski of Poland, and the team was mainly Polish, because only after the match Gukesh announced that other team seconds were Jan Krzysztof Duda, for instance, Radoslav Wojtaszek, and the young Polish GM Klimkowski, I think. So all these guys are from Poland, and Vincent Keimer as a big surprise of Germany. So it's all in words, and now we will look at some games. So the first game in the end of November started with huge surprise, because Dink Liren won with black pieces even. So it was his first win after 300 days, I think, and very important one. I will show you quickly the game. Another big surprise is the opening, because French defense was never played in the World Championship level, or as I remember well, maybe it was played in the matches between Karpov and Korchnoi, the last one in 1981 in Merano, when Korchnoi played French defense. But from that time, so it's more than 40 years, I think no one played French defense on this level. But this opening as big surprise exactly for this match. Of course, we all should know that some nerves are important during such a difficult match, and Gukesh is now just 18 years old, so it's clear that he had some nerves, mainly in this first game, when he lost almost without any big fight. G4, Queen A5. In the next move, Black will make A3 push. So now was the last moment to stop it with A3 move. Then after taking white takes on D4 with any piece, let's say this knight, and all is very unclear. Gukesh had another way of thinking, bishop G2, so he let Black to play A3, which is a bit unpleasant, but still the position is about equal or very unclear. B3, and after C takes, he makes this intermezzo move with B4. Queen goes back and takes on D4 with the knight. But of course, the pawn on C3 is backward, and the square on C4 will be important in this game. Knight b6, so the black knight wants to jump on c4, and it makes this in this move. Bishop goes back, but the position is still very unclear. But the plan of black is rather simple. He already occupies the c4 square, and his play is clearly on the c file. Knight b2. Yeah, it's not so often. It doesn't happen so often that the black knight has such a good outpost on the b2 square. Rook c8, so he makes some pressure on the c3 pawn, and queen c4, and queen is already attacking on a2. Gukesh clearly needs some counterplay, so f5, and Dink wants to exchange the queens. But in the end game, is black surely better, so queen e1. But the position is more and more unpleasant for white. Bishop g5, why not? Attacking the rook. And after rook c2, interesting moment. Now, for instance, is the best time to make castle without any fear. And after h4, a bishop goes just to f4. And black is clearly better because of c3, weak pawn, and a2 in the future. Dink was maybe afraid of something, played for rook c4 instead, h4, bishop f4, and queen b1. Now black simply takes on c3 and is already a pawn up. Gukesh opens the f file. Now Dink should take on e6 with his bishop. It's the better way, and the play can follow as knight e2. Fork, but queen takes on e5 easily, exchange on f4, bishop c5, so the black king cannot castle in this line, but I think it is not as important because black is already 3 pawns up and should win this. What happened in the game after f takes on e6? Gukesh played in the same way, or very similar. Knight e2 fork, queen takes on e5, exchange on f4, and now I think it was the last chance of white to make some interesting fight. So his only chance is to interrupt his castling with bishop c5. Sacrifice the third pawn, but of course the black king can have some troubles, and the position is not such bad for white. Let's say rook f3. The idea to double heavy pieces on the f file. Another idea is to take on a3. Let's say knight goes on c4, queen f1. Threatening mate in 2 after rook f8 check. Sorry. So the black king has to move away, let's say on d8, and maybe queen f2. And of course, white is 3 pawns down, but still in the game of chess between two players, not engines. anything can happen, I would say. And at least black has some problems still with his king. But this chance is gone, and after queen c2, I'm not sure. Maybe Gukesh, because he was nervous in this first game, overlooked queen c4 simply. So, and he maybe thought if black castles in this position is bishop c5 anyway, so he cannot do it. But queen c4 is rather simple. Black is 2 pawns up, and white, of course, who doesn't want to change queens. And after queen d2, black simply castles, and the game is over with 2 pawns up, hanging on g4, on a2. No real chances. So this was a huge surprise, because Dink Liren won with black pieces even in the first game, and Gukesh was extremely nervous, I would say. The second game was not as interesting. It was some Giuco piano. We will not have a look at this. But in the third one, Gukesh was white again and put some pressure on Dink. So it's queen's gambit with c takes d5, nice 3-3 c6. Black wants in the next move to put his bishop on f5. So because of this, queen c2, g6, h3. I think white wants to push g4 in the next move. So bishop f5, queen b3, and queen b6. g4 anyway, exchange of the queens, bishop goes on c2. Strategically, the position of white is rather bad because of the double pawn on b file, but things are not as easy. Bishop f4. This is a little trap, because if black takes on b3, it's knight d2 with tempo. After bishop c2, the bishop is really trapped. After rook c1, let's say bishop e4, f3, and white wins a piece. In another line, after bishop c4, white simply takes, makes e3, and wants to take on c4. And after b5 comes, of course, bishop g2, threatening knight takes on b5, and so on. And white is clearly better. So because of this, black cannot take so easily on b3. But the position is very, very unclear. h5, hanging on g4, rook g1, takes, and knight d7. Now finally knight d2. The knight is protecting on b3, but of course the knight in general is not a very good piece on d2. Rook g1 is very interesting, because because black wants to free his bishop. So in case of danger, he can make g5 first, and then bishop can go back. The preparation of in the openings in this matter was Gukesh and his team clearly better, because in almost every game after the opening, Gukesh had plenty of time, and Dink was mainly 30 minutes down, or 40, or maybe even more. I think it was the same in this game. G5 is ambitious, but not as good. After a couple of moves, is black already slightly better. Bishop goes back. Rook h8. f3. The idea is to trap the bishop sometimes with e4 move and then rook c1. Knight goes on g7 with tempo. Bishop is hanging. Bishop g3, and now happened a serious mistake with rook h5. It was already time to move his bishop from c2 away. Let's say bishop e7 first, attacking the pawn on g5, bishop f2, and now because e4 is already the rear threat, so now is the right time to go back with bishop f5. Strategically, is black really fine, and let's say after e4, bishop e6, is black solid and slightly better. Mainly I would say because of this not very good piece on d2, and after taking bishop takes, in the near future, the black knight from g7 jumps to f5, and black can be really clearly better. But after rook h5, the things go differently. It seems that Dink overlooked something or miscalculated, because his bishop is really trapped in this position. So simply e4 with the next idea, rook c1. Takes, f takes. I think in this moment Gukesh was 60 minutes up on the clock. So Dink faced problems not only at the board. Knight e6. The idea is to cover the bishop with taking on d4, but it doesn't help. Gukesh is very good in calculation, and this he proved in this game as well. Rook c1, knight takes d4, bishop f2. So the knight is hanging, and of course the bishop too. Bishop c5 is another possibility, but anyway, in this position, white wins the piece for 1 or 2 pawns. And white is clearly better. In the game, bishop g7. No very good move, knight e2. Simply wants to exchange the knight on d4, and then to capture the stupid bishop on c2. Dink chooses the line in which he gets 2 pawns for the piece. So the position for black is not dead lost, but clearly worse. Knight e5 looks good, threatening the fork on f3, but Gukesh manages to stabilize his position. Knight e4, rook d8 pin. So again, knight f3 is the threat, but king goes simply away. Rook h2, another pin, but bishop g2. And now a very good maneuver of the of the rook from c2 to d1. First of all, b3. So he limits all the possibilities of the black knight. Then goes simply on d5. So white is already stable in the position and has a piece up for 2 pawns. Dink was already facing the time trouble in this game, and he needed to make some knight moves, I would say, in 5 or less minutes. I think on this move he spent some 6 minutes and was already on 2 minutes left on the clock. So bad time management for him. Bishop g3, rook goes away, knight f3. With some tactical tricks, white wants to exchange the huge knight on e5. The problem of black is that he cannot take on g5, as we will see. King takes. This line is very simple, and mate on d8. The other possibility is a little bit more serious, but anyway, exchange of the rooks, rook d1 check. Black king has some difficulties. He must play f5, and he will lose this pawn in a couple of moves. Let's say rook e1, threatening this double check. King goes away, and white simply capitalizes on f5 and should win this endgame. What happened in the game? After bishop d4, but already in a huge time pressure, white played rook h1. Dink took on g5, but very unpleasant move bishop h3, f5, and bishop f4. The rook on g5 is nearly trapped, and making the next move, black lost on time, on move 37 already, but the position is lost anyway, because after rook h5, white can play this massive blow with bishop takes on f5, using some simple tactics and intermezzo taking on d7, and white wins easily. So after this game, Gukesh won, and the match was tied with 1.5. Then some draws. Yeah, I don't want to show this one. I will not show all the draws, but the game number 7 is a very interesting one. So we will have a look at this game. In which components was Dink better than Gukesh? It's subjective, of course, but to my mind, Dink was better in positional play slightly and in defense. And Gukesh, I would say, was better in all other components, such as opening preparation, calculation, time management, and he wanted to win every game. But on the other hand, Dink was playing every game just not to lose. This is my opinion. Game number 7. in Greenfield, Indian. And Gukesh and his team prepared a very interesting novelty. Normal moves are knight c3 or maybe a4. But Gukesh and his team prepared rook e1, which looks a little bit stupid, but is of course playable. The main idea is that after taking on c4, white can push e4 and can have a better structure in the center. The difference is after obvious knight c3, in the same position after e4, black has some unpleasant things with b4 coming next. So in this position would be already better when the rook is on e1 instead of the knight. This is the main idea. Of course, black in this position can make many moves, like bishop f5, bishop g4, or whatever, a6. But it was unpleasant as a surprise for Dink, for sure. And I think he spent again a huge amount of time here. Finally, he took on c4, e4. So white builds an interesting structure in the center, bishop g4. And this is also an interesting difference. So the knight has not to be on c3 only and goes on d2 in the position. With the move bishop g4, black already agrees that after h3 he takes on f3. So white can hope in the long run on the advantage of bishop pair. The position is still equal, but black has to choose his way how to play on. What was possible was b5, h3 takes, and white has, of course, compensation for the pawn. Dink chose c5, which is strategically a bit risky, because white can have always this strong pawn or later passed pawn on the d5 square. And he always captures the c4 pawn back if he wants. Because some moves like b5 are of course childish because of a4. And white captures on c4 anyway. So after d5, the game continues with e6, h3, bishop takes, because the knight wants to capture on c4. e takes. Now, of course, black wants to take on d5, but he cannot do it because of this very annoying pin along the diagonal. The knight is hanging on b7 later, and after bishop d4, which looks still good, comes bishop h6. And the black queen has a lot of work to do. Has to protect knight on d5 and the rook on e5, let's say. And white wins. So black cannot take so easily on d5. Knight d7, knight takes c4. In the next move, white wants to make a4 and to stabilize his knight in the center. That's why comes b5. Now very interesting move, knight a3. We will see later. Queen b6, bishop f4. In this position, white is slightly better because of his bishop pair and rather strong passed pawn. The white queen is well placed on d2, is protecting d5, b2, e1 square and helping the bishop along this diagonal. So the very good square for the queen. Rook d8, knight c2. So this was the idea of Gukesh. And Gukesh wants to make b4 on his next move. After knight f8 comes really b4. Now starts the short fight for the central d4 square. This idea with b4 is typical in Benoni structures. Black creates his passed pawn. Gukesh wins the fight for d4 square with bishop e3 first. Queen goes on a6, and bishop d4. This bishop is well placed on d4, of course, and d5 is never hanging, as we will see in the next line. Change of the rooks. If black takes on d5, it's of course stupid, and he loses a piece. Black queen took on a2. But this is not a sacrifice of the pawn, because white can always take on a7. Rook a1, a queen goes here. The black queen wants to play queen d3 in the next move. That's why rook a3 first. The queen is almost trapped, but still check on b1, king g2. With knight takes d5, it's very similar as in the previous note. Black doesn't lose a piece, but just an exchange, but the position will be lost. We will see. White takes on g7 first, takes on d5. Now is a piece up. Black can hope to take on d5. White takes back. This position would be maybe unclear, but white pieces are very, very active. White takes simply on a7 and forces black to play queen f5, and the endgame is definitely lost. d7. 5. White wants to take on b5 rather than on a7. Queen b3. Some repetition of moves. This was interesting stuff in the whole match, because it happened in the match, I think 6 or 7 times, and always Dink wanted to repeat moves, and always Gukesh finally made some other move. So this is also clear that Gukesh wanted to play simply and had the initiative of the match in his hands. Finally took on b5 and queen d3, as mentioned before. Now Gukesh goes for a very good endgame after queen f4. But what is interesting, and Engine recommends such a silly move, bishop back to e3, and white is surprisingly much better in this endgame after exchange of the queens, and white can still play on his bishop pair and strong passed pawn. This is some possible line. And white is much better. Instead of this, Gukesh goes for queen f4. The knight will be exchanged. Black takes. White takes. The pressure of white pieces is really high, so black finally goes for exchange of the queens. Happened. And on the first look, it looks like black is in huge troubles because he likely loses the c pawn, which will happen. But the black knight gets very interesting future, as we will see. So rook c5, and this stupid knight. Maybe the structure is for black better, this this all Isolani pawns, just because of the knight. Because when the pawn was on g6, the knight cannot move so easily. But in this pawn structure, as already written, the black knight can maneuver. The rook endgame should be won for white, but black correctly follows his plan. And suddenly the knight on e7 is very well placed. He's protecting f5 and attacking d5 in the same time. Now suddenly a huge mistake of Ding in the last move before the time control. After knight c8, followed by a knight d6. Yeah, it's still a pawn down, but it's on the edge somewhere between losing and making a draw. Instead of this, black makes king e5, which is maybe an overlook. White makes rook h4, and now it comes to exchange of the pawns, so d5 pawn for h6, which is in white's favor. Now the position is back, and white is clearly better again. King e1 is played, but it is not a very good move. Gukesh wanted to avoid the rook endgame, so Gukesh had a little bit respect of defense. But if we look shortly, it doesn't matter so much. So h4 was a better idea. And if it comes to a rook endgame, the pawn structure and the pawn up speak surely for white. Now it's difficult to make a move for black. Let's say after rook b7, it's check on the 5th rank, and the king comes to f4 and wins this f5 pawn. Another line after f6. Rook a6 is interesting. And now very strange maneuver, but very nice. Rook c7, h5, so the passed pawn goes forward, and after rook h7, very interesting move. The idea of engine, I would say. So the threat is to play b6 with check, and if the black king moves, then comes king f4, and white wins f4 or a7 with check. So the rook endgame would be won for white, but instead of this, king e1 is played, and f6, a very good defensive idea. I will show just a few more moves. As I said, Dink was better in defense, so in this game he proves this. Now all the black pieces are very active, and f4, another good idea to exchange some weak pawns of black and to free the third rank for the rook. Yeah, so and after this the position is almost drawn, and Ding defended very well and gave no real chances to Gukesh. We could say in this game Gukesh had some real chances, but didn't make the best of it. Some other draws. I think it was 8 draws in a row, and now we will have a very interesting period of four very fighting games, and I hope we will manage to show them all. So the match was tied after 10 games. The score was 5-5, and Gukesh played this very risky opening as white. He never played it before, and it was a very big surprise for Dink. It's Benke Gambit reversed, or Blumenfeld Gambit reversed. Now very interesting move is g5. Maybe the audience knows it. This is called as Gambit of David Navarra, because he used to play g5 on several occasions. And very interesting idea or continuation for white is queen b3 with a little trap. Now the main move is bishop g7. White maybe takes on g5 and so on. The position is very unclear. But the trap is if g4, white can surprisingly take on d4 and wins the rook in the end. b4 c5 e3, so it's Blumenfeld Gambit reversed. The positions are very unclear. I played myself, so I know this a little bit. Black makes knight f6, and this is a real novelty. On this high level, white makes a waiting move with a3. This is very interesting. What was the preparation of Dink in this game, because I think for knight f6 he spent some 40 minutes, and for the next move for bishop g4 he spent another 20 minutes. So he was 60 minutes down on the clock, already one move 5. This is incredible in the championship match. he took on f3, white took back, queen c7. Gukesh was still some 50 minutes up on the clock in this moment, but made quickly a very bad move from the positional point of view. He made d3, but then had huge difficulties with his bishop and with his pawn structure, as we will see. What was definitely better, and white is objectively slightly better after c5. The idea is to play d3 just after bishop goes away, let's say on c4 or on b5, but then to play d3 and knight d2 and so on. At the possible line goes knight c6, bishop on b5, as in Rui Lopez, a5. White can simply castle, sacrifice a pawn for some moments. Now it's hanging on d4. Let's say e5. White simply takes, and white is slightly better. So this improvement could be played in the near future. Instead comes d3. And the problem is that after a5, it is very difficult for white to keep the black squares in the center. For instance, c5 square. The rook on a1 is not protected, so a takes b4 is the real threat. Sorry. And the typical line would be bishop b2 to protect the rook. But the problem is, after taking all the pieces, suddenly comes e5. And white cannot protect on b4 anymore. After b5, it's check with the queen, losing the bishop. And after c5, black can use the same idea with taking on c5, check, and white is very bad. So these are very annoying problems for white, and he has to make b5, which gives, as I said, the c5 square to the hands of Dink and to his knights. Knight d7, g3, knight c5, bishop g2. Now black is already at least slightly better, and he could play in very simple way with e5 and bishop d6 next to make very strong blockade on black squares and to castle short. And black can only black can play for this position for the win. But of course, during such a match, nerves are very important, and Dink made a worse decision. It seems that white loses the pawn on d3, but queen f4 is still possible. After knight c takes d3, it's queen takes d4 always. Rook d8, rook d1, using the pin. So black still cannot take on d3, but black is still very fine after simply e6 and bishop d6. Still a very good blockade on black squares. Instead of this, Dink makes g6, a4. What is important that after b6 always comes bishop c6 check, very annoying. h5. And maybe this is the idea that Dink missed or underestimated. b6, white in the long run sacrifice the pawn and gets very interesting possibilities on the b file. White exchanges the pieces and is very strong on the long diagonal. Knight goes back, and finally the white knight goes away. Rook d7, knight c2. The idea is to play rook b1 and rook b5 and to have very good pressure on the fifth rank, so Dink finally takes on b6. But white still has a very good compensation for the pawn. Rook b1 with tempo, queen back, rook b5. The idea is simple, to double the rooks on the b file and to take in the future on b7. Also, knight a1, very interesting move. I think Gukesh was counting on the time pressure of Dink as well, so he makes his life even more complicated. The idea for the knight is to jump over b3 to c5 mainly, which happens in the game. After rook d6, the position is still very unclear. Let's say rook b1 and rook e6, and black can maybe hold the position. Instead, rook b8, knight goes to b3, and now Dink faces very huge problems. After e6, knight jumps to c5, rook goes away, and rook db1. Here I can draw some lines. Everything is fighting for the b pawn in this position. All the white pieces. And now what happened in time pressure? Dink made a blunder, a very bad move. He played queen c8 and simply lost his nerves, his calculation, simply overlooked a simple blow. Queen takes c6, and white simply wins a knight. We have to say that after knight b4 is the only move to stop the pressure on the b file. And white is slightly better, but anything can still happen. This is the line that could be played. Now fork on c3 is coming. White can sacrifice an exchange, but still the position is very unclear. Here is written that white is slightly better, but okay, a pawn for the exchange, a very good knight on b7, but still everything is possible in the position. But instead of this, Dink makes this huge blunder and loses on the spot. So after this game, Gukesh was leading 6-5 and needed just 1.5 points out of 3 to win the match. The next game was played on the next day. Dink was white, and this was his last real chance to to fight back and to tie the match. English opening. Gukesh, his opening preparation was in the whole match surely better than the preparation of Ding, but in this game he played not in the best mood, I would say. He has in the opening several setups. One of them is this one, like in Benoni style. This is possible, or in the next moves, let's say in this position, again, some style of old Benoni, or I don't know how to say it. Everything is possible, but he chose to take on e3. Now in the position, white of course wants to make the push d4, so e5, sorry, so e5 comes, but I feel the preparation of Gukesh in this game was not very huge one. Rook e1. And we will see after some moves, the position of black is already very, very unpleasant. What was possible and very concrete was to jump on g4 in this move. Let's say bishop goes on d2. Yeah, this is possible. Bishop c5 now is not the very great one because of knight e4. But after bishop d2, black can maybe take on d3. But white gets a very, very good compensation after h3. Knight goes back at knight e5. The whole idea is to sacrifice even the second pawn. Now, of course, to take on e5. So to win one pawn back and rook c1, and white has a good pressure. Instead of this comes h6. Very clever move, a3. The idea of a3 is of course to play b4 and b5 next. Then can white simply win the pawn on e5. And the second idea of a3 is to provoke a5, which happened. And now in the long run, white knight can use the very good square on b5 and make an outpost there. h3 first, bishop e6, king h2, some useful moves, rook b8, no one knows why, queen c2. Now maybe was the good chance to jump on d4. Yes, white is still better, but black can maybe play in this position. After queen c2, rook e8. Yeah, I must say Gukesh in this game played under his level. Yeah, even again maybe it's because of the nerves, because he was leading 6-5 and very close to win the title. Needed just some draws. Knight b5, yeah, this is a very good outpost for the knight. Bishop f5, on d3 is hanging, rook d1, knight d7, and queen d2. So starting here, the position is already very, very unpleasant for black. And Gukesh played just zero move, made nothing, and played just bishop g6. Another possibility is knight c5 to make something interesting, some struggle. After d4, let's say knight d3, d5, takes an exchange, white takes back. Now the knight can jump only to d4. White win the first pawn on d4, and secondly the second one on a5, and white is slightly better. After bishop g6 comes the push in the center, so d4. The idea after taking, white can play some other move, not only taking on d4 back, but bishop f4 is very, very annoying, and c7 is a big problem. So after d4, e4, white knight has to go back, but it is not a very bad piece. His route over e2, maybe to c3, or as in the game to f4 is the good one, and white is simply clearly better here. Very unpleasant position for Gukesh, who is very good in concrete positions, in calculations, and very good position instead of for Dink, who is a better player in positional way, I would say. Knight b6, hanging on c4, queen c3, bishop fc, f6, queen c2. Black doesn't know what to do. The position is very unpleasant, with no future, no active possibilities. Now comes the time for the knight. Bishop g5, and knight jumps to f4. Black takes, white takes back. So bishop pair, a pressure on c7, and d pawn comes in the near future forward. The position is already objectively lost. A useful move, queen c3. Knight back to b8. Now very interesting moment because Dink could play knight a7 and win the exchange simply. But as he said in the press conference, he didn't see it. Mainly because he was focused on the push of the d pawn already. But d4 is still, d5 is still very, very good for white. Very strong d pawn, now already passed pawn, and knight jumps to c7. The positional pressure is overwhelming. White wins the first pawn, and can play where he wants. White wins on c5 the second pawn. Rook comes to the 7th rank, which is usually very good, and d pawn goes forward. Dink played very softly queen e3, but he can make really what he wants. Another nice way to win the game on the spot is rook e8. The idea is to queen the pawn on d8 simply. Let's say black takes the queen, rook takes d8 with check, king goes away, d8 queen, black takes on d1, and finally mate. Instead of this comes queen e3. Other position is won anyway. Rook c2, bishop d6. The threat is rook e8 on the next one. And after f6, a little combination with taking on g7 with bishop takes f8 next with the check and d8, the new queen. So this was the positional massacre. Gukesh had no chances in this game. Dink outplayed him as a child and tied the match with 6-6. We don't have so much time, so I will show just briefly the last game. In the previous game, Gukesh was white and had some good pressure and good chances to win, but Dink managed to defend himself and to make the draw. So before the last game, the match was tied with 6.5 to 6.5. And everybody expected the tie breaks on the next day. Everybody expected that Dink will play with white pieces to make some little pressure, but with no risk of losing the game, which almost happened. So some kind of reversed Greenfeld in Indian defense. Gukesh chose the line with knight e7, which is playable. The idea is to use the second knight for this knight c6 with tempo. Queen goes back, d4, e3. So the little fight in the center. Bishop c5, takes, knight c3, castle, knight b5. Now bishop b6 is not the best one. Objectively better is e5. This possible line. White maybe wins the pawn on d4, but with opposite colored bishops, he cannot win the endgames. Instead of this, bishop goes to b6, which is not the best solution. Now white is slightly better in all the lines. Let's say after queen e2, which is logical. Rook d1 next. Let's say a6, rook d1 intermezzo, queen e7, knight goes back with normal setup like bishop f4, bishop d6 idea, or b3 and fianchetto on b2. White is better in this position. This was expected, but instead of this, Dink chooses b3 idea, which is not the best. a3, and knight goes silly back to c3. Black can now occupy the d4 square, b2 and e5. The position is equal. Now, very interesting choice for Gukesh was to play b5. So this was again his try to make something interesting on the board, not to allow Dink to make a draw so easily. But suddenly now Dink starts to avoid any risk and starts to play just for draw. Instead of this, he could simply take on d4 and to use the move f4, because knight can be hanging in some moments. And after taking on c4 and rook c8, rook c1, white is very slightly better and can play with no risk. Maybe Dink was afraid of something and started to play just to make draw in this position. Took on b5 and played very strange move, knight f4, just to exchange some pieces. And now bishop f3 back. If Dink wants to make only draw, really, he can exchange the bishops as well. Yeah, after bishop d7, this is very simple. And if his goal is to make a draw only, he can make it. But bishop f3 lets some play still possible. Takes b4. Now again, a very strange decision to play a4 and to exchange all the three pawns on the queen side. It means to lose one of them. It really happened after some moves, because the pawn b3 is very weak anyway, and Dink simply wanted to lose it and to make draw on the opposite flank. So it happened in this position, and Dink exchanged the rooks. In this endgame, the players played next 30 moves, 2 against 3 on the same flank. Yeah, it should be draw. But of course, only black can use something or try something. So Gukesh tried, and finally he won this game. I will show just shortly the decisive moment of this. So the players exchanged a pair of pawns. The position is still drawn, but of course white has to be careful and cannot make any mistake. King f6, rook f4, king e5. The idea of black is very interesting to maneuver his bishop on e4 and to create later in several positions he can create the dangerous pass pawn on the e file. So Dink has to solve some problems at the board, and in this moment Dink was again very down on time. He had some 10 or 8 minutes on the clock, while Gukesh had some more than one hour. So huge advantage on time for Gukesh, and under pressure Dink made this last blunder of the match, which will be used as a good example for children, how to avoid pawn endgames and so on. And after rook f2, white simply loses because black can exchange all the pieces, not only the rooks, but, which is most important, also the bishops. Gukesh couldn't believe his eyes when he saw this move, and just made some simple control for 2 or 3 minutes, and finally quickly calculated all the necessary lines in the pawn endgame. Dink already knew that he made this huge mistake, and after the exchange of all the pieces, the position is simply lost for white, which is important to know this distant opposition. After king e1, only king e5 works well, but it's enough. In the game, king e3, king e5, and Dink resigned. I would just like to mention the line, because after king d3, f4, king e2, black cannot take on g3, as far as I know. This would be a huge mistake, but he can easily win with f3, and even in the positions where white can hope for a stalemate, let's say here. This is the idea of stalemate, but black can avoid this even with a simple sacrifice of the pawn. The idea is that after taking on f2, somehow black always wins with this pawn structure, taking on g3, no matter if opposition is there or not, and black wins all the positions here. So this was the last game of the match. Gukesh won with black pieces, and finally won with 7.5 to 6.5. Now I will ask if there are some questions. You can ask in Czech or in English, as you wish. So if no questions, I think my lesson is finished, and I will stop recording. Is it right, Martin? Okay, I thank you for your attention, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.